Magha Our Past Sai. First edition, February 2006. Falquina 1920. Forward. The National Curriculum Framework, NCF, 2005, recommends that children's life.
Image summary. This image shows a carving. The carving depicts a scene with people and elephants. There is a group of people in the upper portion of the carving, and elephants are shown in the lower portion. The carving seems to represent a scene from ancient times, possibly depicting a royal procession or a public event involving elephants and people.
Forward. The National Curriculum Framework, NCF, 2005, recommends that children's life at school must be linked to their life outside the school. This principle marks a departure from the legacy of bookish learning, which continues to shape our system and causes a gap between the school, home, and community. The syllabi and textbooks developed on the basis of NCF signify an attempt to implement this basic idea. They also attempt to discourage rote learning and the maintenance of sharp boundaries between different subject areas. We hope these measures will take us significantly further in the direction of a child-centered system of education outlined in the National Policy on Education, 1986. The success of this effort depends on the steps that school principals and teachers will take to encourage children to reflect on their own learning and to pursue imaginative activities and questions. We must recognize that, given space, time, and freedom, children generate new knowledge by engaging with the information passed on to them by adults. Treating the prescribed textbook as the sole basis of examination is one of the key reasons why other resources and sites of learning are ignored. Inculcating creativity and initiative is possible if we perceive and treat children as participants in learning, not as receivers of a fixed body of knowledge. These aims imply considerable change in school routines and mode of functioning. Flexibility in the daily timetable is as necessary as rigor in implementing the annual calendar, so that the required number of teachers. Our national anthem. Our national anthem, composed originally in Bangla by Rabindranath Tagore, was adopted in its Hindi version by the Constituent Assembly as the national anthem of India on 24 January 1950.
Image summary. This image contains the text of the Indian national anthem. The anthem is written in Hindi. The text includes several states of India.
Why study history? This year, in Class 6, you will read history. It is part of a bigger group of subjects known as social science. Social science helps us understand the working of our social world. It tells us about geography, the way the economy works, and the manner in which social and political life is organized. Most parts of social science other than history tell you about the world in the present. History will help you understand how this present evolved. It will tell you about the past of the present. When we live in a society, we become used to the world around us. We begin to take that world for granted. We forget that life was not always the way we see it. Can you, for instance, imagine a life without fire? Can you think of what it is to live in a society where the cultivation of crops was unknown? Or what it was to live at a time when roads and railways did not exist, and yet people traveled long distances? History can take us into these pasts. History, in this sense, is an adventure. It is a journey across time and space. It transports us into another world, another age in which people lived differently. Their economy and society, their beliefs and faiths, their clothes and food, their settlements and buildings, their arts and crafts, everything was different. History can open doors into such worlds. You may shrug your shoulders and say, why should we bother about pasts that are no longer with us, pasts that have gone by? But history is not just about the past. It is about the present. The society we live in has been fashioned by those who came before us. The joys and sorrows of their daily lives, their attempt to grapple with the problems of their time, their discoveries and inventions slowly transformed human societies. These changes were often so gradual, so seemingly small, that their impact was not noticed by people at that time. Only later, when we return to the past, when we study history, can we begin to see how these changes happened, and we can observe their long-term effect. By reading history, we can understand how the modern world has emerged over long centuries of development. The book that you will study this year will take you back to our ancient pasts. Over the next 2 years, you will continue your journey through the history of subsequent periods. In this book, you will read not just about the kings and queens who lived in ancient India and about their conquests and policies. You will learn about hunters and peasants, craftspeople and traders. You will see how fire came to be used and iron tools were discovered, how wheat and rice began to be cultivated, and villages and towns developed. You will read about pilgrims and saints, buildings and paintings, religions and beliefs. You will find out that history is not only about great men. It is also about the lives and activities of ordinary women, men, and children. History is not only about political events, it is about everything that happens in society. The book will also help you understand how historians come to know about the past. Somewhat like detectives, historians follow clues and traces left by people who lived in the past. Everything that survives from earlier times, stone tools, traces of plants, bones, written material and pictures, ornaments and implements, inscriptions and coins, buildings and sculpture, pots and pans, can tell us something about the past. Historians and archaeologists study these sources and try and understand them. In this book, you will see many of these sources and find out how historians study these. But studying history can help us understand more than the past. It enables us to develop important skills and qualities. When we try and enter another world, we have to learn how to do this to understand people whose lives were different. As we do this, we open up our minds and break out of our small present-day worlds. We begin to see how other people may think and act. This can become a learning experience that enriches us in many different ways. So, before you shrug your shoulders, ask yourself one question. Do I want to know who I am? Do I want to understand how this society works? Do I want to understand the world in which I live? If you do, then you will need to know how our societies have evolved and how our pasts have shaped the present.
Image summary. The image displays two distinct artifacts. One artifact is a cylindrical object with markings or designs around its exterior. The other artifact appears to be a fragment of a stone tablet or similar material, bearing inscriptions or symbols. Based on the artifacts, it can be inferred that the image relates to historical or archaeological items, potentially showcasing examples of ancient craftsmanship and writing systems.
In this book, look out for these. Imagine, let's recall, let's discuss, let's do. You will find that each chapter is introduced by a young girl or a boy. Each chapter is divided into sections. Read, discuss, and understand each section before proceeding to the next. Some chapters contain definitions. Many chapters contain a portion from a source, clues from which historians write history. Read these carefully and discuss the questions they contain. Many of our sources are visual. Each illustration has a story to tell you. We'll also find maps. Look at these and try to locate the places mentioned in the lessons. Many chapters contain boxes with interesting, additional information. All chapters end with a section titled Elsewhere. This tells you about something that was happening in another part of the world. At the end of each chapter, you will find a list of keywords. These are to remind you of important ideas, themes introduced in the lesson. You will also find some dates listed at the end of each chapter. In each chapter, there are intertext questions and activities that are highlighted. Spend some time discussing these as you go along, and there is a small section titled Imagine. This is your chance to go back into the past and figure out what life would have been like. You will also find 3 kinds of activities listed at the end of each chapter. Let's recall, let's discuss, and let's do. So, you will find that there is a lot to read, see, think about, and do. We do hope you enjoy it. About and do. We do hope you enjoy it.
Image summary. The image shows a set of visual cues or icons used within a book. These icons denote specific sections or elements, such as definitions, sources, additional information, content from elsewhere, keywords, and important dates. These visual cues are intended to help readers quickly identify and navigate different types of content within the book. The consistent use of these cues throughout the book can aid in comprehension and engagement with the material. Image summary. This is an image of a copyright notice indicating that the material is copyrighted by NCERT and is not to be republished. The image also contains a year, potentially indicating the publication or copyright date.
Rashida's question. Rashida sat reading the newspaper. Suddenly, her eyes fell on a small headline. 100 years ago. How, she wondered, could anyone know what had happened so many years ago? Finding out what happened. Yesterday, you could listen to the radio, watch television, read a newspaper. Last year, ask somebody who remembers. But what about long, long ago? Let us see how it can be done. What can we know about the past? What can we know about the past? There are several things we can find out: what people ate, the kinds of clothes they wore, the houses in which they lived. We can find out about the lives of hunters, herders, farmers, rulers, merchants, priests, craftspersons, artists, musicians, and scientists. We can also find out about the games children played, the stories they heard, the plays they saw, the songs they sang. Where did people live? Where did people live? Find the river Nirmada on map 1, page 2. People have lived along the banks of this river for several 100,000 years. Some of the earliest people who lived here were skilled gatherers. That is, people who gathered their food. They knew about the vast wealth of plants in the surrounding forests and collected roots, fruits, and other forest produce for their food. They also hunted animals. Now find the Sulayman and Kurthar hills to the northwest. Some of the areas where women and men first began to grow crops such as wheat and barley about 8,000 years ago are located here. People also began rearing animals like sheep, goat, and cattle, and lived in villages. Locate the Garo Hills to the northeast and the Vindhyas in central India. These were some of the other areas where agriculture developed. The places where rice was first grown are to the north of the Vindhyas. Trace the river Indus and its tributaries. Tributaries are smaller rivers that flow into a larger river. About 4,700 years ago, some of the earliest cities flourished on the banks of these rivers. Later, about 2,500 years ago, cities developed on the banks of the Ganga and its tributaries and along the sea coasts. Locate the Ganga and its tributary called the Sun. In ancient times, the area along these rivers to the south of the Ganga was known as Magadhya, now lying in the state of Bihar. Its rulers were very powerful and set up a large kingdom. Kingdoms were set up in other parts of the country as well. Throughout, people traveled from one part of the subcontinent to another. The hills and high mountains, including the Himalayas, deserts, rivers, and seas, made journeys dangerous at times, but never impossible. So men and women moved in search of livelihood, as also to escape from natural disasters like floods or droughts. Sometimes men marched in armies, conquering others' lands. Besides, merchants traveled with caravans or ships, carrying valuable goods from place to place. And religious teachers walked from village to village, town to town, stopping to offer instruction and advice on the way. Finally, some people perhaps travel, wanting to discover new and exciting places. All these led to the sharing of ideas between people. Why do people travel nowadays? Look at map 1 once more. Hills, mountains, and seas form the natural frontiers of the subcontinent. While it was difficult to cross these frontiers, those who wanted could and did scale the mountains and cross the seas. People from across the frontiers also came into the subcontinent and settled here. Facing page. This is a map of South Asia, including the present countries of India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, and Sri Lanka, and the neighboring countries of Afghanistan, Iran, China, and Myanmar. South Asia is often called a subcontinent because although it is smaller than a continent, it is very large and is separated from the rest of Asia by seas, hills, and mountains. These movements of people enriched our cultural traditions. People have shared new ways of carving stone, composing music, and even cooking food over several hundreds of years.
Map 1 summary. This is a physical map of the subcontinent. The map depicts the geographical locations of various mountains, hills, rivers, and water bodies. The map indicates the location of important rivers like the Indus, Ganga, Nirmada, Godavari, Krishna, Kaveri, and their tributaries. It also shows the location of the Himalayas, Sulayman and Kurthar hills, Garo hills, and Vindhyas. The map suggests a network of rivers across the subcontinent and the presence of mountain ranges that act as natural frontiers.
Names of the land. Two of the words we often use for our country are India and Bharat. The word India comes from the Indus, called Sindhu in Sanskrit. Find Iran and Greece in your atlas. The Iranians and the Greeks who came through the northwest about 2,500 years ago and were familiar with the Indus, called it the Hindos or the Indos, and the land to the east of the river was called India. The name Bharata was used for a group of people who lived in the northwest, and who are mentioned in the Rigveda, the earliest composition in Sanskrit, dated to about 3,500 years ago. Later, it was used for the country. Finding out about the past. There are several ways of finding out about the past. One is to search for and read books that were written long ago. These are called manuscripts because they were written by hand. This comes from the Latin word manu, meaning hand. These were usually written on palm leaf or on the specially prepared bark of a tree known as the birch, which grows in the Himalayas. Over the years, many manuscripts were eaten away by insects, some were destroyed, but many have survived, often preserved in temples and monasteries. These books dealt with all kinds of subjects: religious beliefs and practices, the lives of kings, medicine, and science. Besides, there were epics, poems, plays. Many of these were written in Sanskrit, others were in Prakrit languages used by ordinary people, and Tamil. We can also study inscriptions. These are writings on relatively hard surfaces such as stone or metal. Sometimes, kings got their orders inscribed so that people could see, read, and obey them. There are other kinds of inscriptions as well, where men and women, including kings and queens, recorded what they did. For example, kings often kept records of victories in battle. Can you think of the advantages of writing on a hard surface? And what could have been the difficulties? There were many other things that were made and used in the past. Those who study these objects are called archaeologists. They study the remains of buildings made of stone and brick, paintings, and sculpture. They also explore and dig under the surface of the earth, to find tools, weapons, pots, pans, ornaments, and coins. Some of these objects may be made of stone, others of bone, baked clay, or metal. Objects that are made of hard, imperishable substances usually survive for a long time. Archaeologists also look for bones of animals, birds, and fish to find out what people ate in the past. Plant remains survive far more rarely. If seeds of grain or pieces of wood have been burnt, they survive in a charred form. Do you think cloth is found frequently by archaeologists? Historians, that is, scholars who study the past, often use the word source to refer to the information found from manuscripts, inscriptions, and archaeology. Once sources are found, learning about the past becomes an adventure as we reconstruct it bit by bit. So historians and archaeologists are like detectives who use all these sources like clues to find out about our pasts.
Figure summary. This is an image of a page from a palm leaf manuscript. The manuscript is relatively old, dating back approximately 1,000 years. The palm leaves were cut and tied together to create books. Figure summary. This is an image of an old inscription found in Kandahar, Afghanistan. The inscription dates back approximately 2,250 years. It was inscribed on the orders of a ruler named Ashoka. The inscription is written in two different scripts and languages, Greek and Aramaic, which were used in that area. Image summary. The image shows a collection of artifacts from an old city. There is a pot which is estimated to be around 4,700 years old. Additionally, there is an old silver coin, which was in use approximately 2,500 years ago. The coin appears different from modern currency.
One past or many. Did you notice the title of this book, Our Pasts? We have used the word pasts in plural to draw attention to the fact that the past was different for different groups of people. For example, the lives of herders or farmers were different from those of kings and queens. The lives of merchants were different from those of craftspersons, and so on. Also, as is true even today, people followed different practices and customs in different parts of the country. For example, today most people living in the Andaman Islands get their own food by fishing, hunting, and collecting forest produce. By contrast, most people living in cities depend on others for supplies of food. Differences such as these existed in the past as well. Besides, there is another kind of difference. We know a great deal about kings and the battles they fought because they kept records of their victories. Generally, ordinary people such as hunters, fishing folk, gatherers, farmers, or herders did not keep records of what they did. While archaeology helps us to find out about their lives, there is much that remains unknown. What do dates mean? If somebody asks you the date, you will probably mention the day, month, and year, 2000 and something. These years are counted from the date generally assigned to the birth of Jesus Christ, the founder of Christianity. So, 2000 means 2,000 years after the birth of Christ. All dates before the birth of Christ are counted backwards and usually have the letters BC, before Christ, added on. In this book, we will refer to dates going back from the present, using 2000 as our starting point. Letters with dates. BC, we have seen stands for before Christ. You will sometimes find AD before dates. This stands for two Latin words, Anno Domini, meaning in the year of the Lord, i.e. Christ. So 2012 can also be written as AD 2012. Sometimes CA is used instead of AD and BCI instead of BC. The letters CA stand for Common Era and BCA for Before Common Era. We use these terms because the Christian era is now used in most countries of the world. In India, we began using this form of dating from about 200 years ago. And sometimes, the letters BP meaning before present are used. Find two dates mentioned on page 3. Which set of letters would you use for them? Elsewhere. We have seen that inscriptions are inscribed on hard surfaces. Many of these were inscribed several hundreds of years ago. All inscriptions contain both scripts and languages. Languages which were used, as well as scripts, have changed over time. So how do scholars understand what was inscribed? This can be done through a process known as decipherment. One of the most famous stories of decipherment comes from Egypt, a country in North Africa where there were kings and queens about 5,000 years ago. Rosetta is a town on the north coast of Egypt, and here an inscribed stone was found, which contained inscriptions in 3 different languages and scripts, Greek, and 2 forms of Egyptian. Scholars who could read Greek figured out that the names of kings and queens were enclosed in a little frame, called a cartouche. They then placed the Greek and the Egyptian signs side by side and identified the sounds for which the Egyptian letters stood. As you can see, a lion stood for L, and a bird for A. Once they knew what the letters stood for, they could read other inscriptions as well.
Image summary. The image shows examples of decipherment from Egypt, specifically cartouches containing names. The cartouches display Egyptian hieroglyphs alongside their Greek letter equivalents, demonstrating how scholars deciphered the ancient Egyptian language. It illustrates the process of matching Greek letters to Egyptian symbols to understand the inscriptions, allowing for the reading of other inscriptions as well. The image shows the Greek letters corresponding to the Egyptian symbols.
Imagine you have to interview an archaeologist. Prepare a list of 5 questions that you would like to ask him. Let's recall. 1. Match the following. Nirmada Valley, the first big kingdom, Magadha hunting and gathering Garo Hill cities about 2,500 years ago Indus, and its tributaries early agriculture Gunga Valley, the first cities too. List one major difference between manuscripts and inscriptions. Let's discuss. 3. Return to Rashidia's question. Can you think of some answers to it? 9. What, where, how, and when? Some important dates. The beginning of agriculture 8,000 years ago, the first cities on the Indus, 4,700 years ago, cities in the Gunga Valley, a big kingdom in Magadha, 2,500 years ago, the present, about 2000 AD CE 4. Make a list of all the objects that archaeologists may find. Which of these could be made of stone? 5. Why do you think ordinary men and women did not generally keep records of what they did? 6. Describe at least 2 ways in which you think the lives of kings would have been different from those of farmers. Let's do. 7. Find the word craftspersons on page 1. List at least 5 different crafts that you know about today. Are the craftspersons A. Men, B. Women, C. Both men and women? 8. What were the subjects on which books were written in the past? Which of these would you like to read?
Map 8 Summary. This is a political map of India, showing different states and union territories. The map shows the geographical boundaries of the country and its constituent states. The map also displays neighboring countries and water bodies. The map provides an overview of the political divisions within India.
Chapter 2. On the trail of the earliest people. Tushar's train journey. Tushar was going from Delhi to Chennai for his cousin's wedding. They were traveling by train, and he had managed to squeeze into the window seat, his nose glued to the glass pane. As he watched trees and houses fly past, his uncle tapped his shoulder and said, "Do you know that trains were first used about 150 years ago, and that people began using buses a few decades later?" Tushar wondered, when people couldn't travel quickly from one place to another, did they spend their entire lives wherever they were born? Not quite.
Image summary. The image is a portrait of a young man. The image is a close-up shot, focusing on the man's face and upper body. The man has dark hair and skin, and he is wearing a light-colored shirt. The The background of the image is out of focus.
The earliest people, why were they on the move? We know about people who lived in the subcontinent as early as 2 million years ago. Today, we describe them as hunter-gatherers. The name comes from the way in which they got their food. Generally, they hunted wild animals, caught fish and birds, gathered fruits, roots, nuts, seeds, leaves, stalks, and eggs. The immense variety of plants in a tropical land like ours meant that gathering plant produce was an extremely important means of obtaining food. None of these things was easy to do. There are several animals that run faster than us, many that are stronger. To hunt animals or catch fish and birds, people need to be alert, quick, and have lots of presence of mind. To collect plant produce, you need to find out which plants or parts of plants are edible, that is, can be eaten, as many can be poisonous. You also need to find out about the seasons when the fruits ripen. List the skills and knowledge that the children of these communities had. Do you have these skills and knowledge? There are at least 4 reasons why hunter-gatherers moved from place to place. First, if they had stayed at one place for a long time, they would have eaten up all the available plant and animal resources. Therefore, they would have had to go elsewhere in search of food. Second, animals move from place to place, either in search of smaller prey or, in the case of deer and wild cattle, in search of grass and leaves. That is why those who hunted them had to follow their movements. Third, plants and trees bear fruit in different seasons. So, people may have moved from season to season in search of different kinds of plants. Fourth, people, plants, and animals need water to survive. Water is found in lakes, streams, and rivers. While many rivers and lakes are perennial, with water throughout the year, others are seasonal. People living on their banks would have had to go in search of water during the dry seasons, winter, and summer. Besides, people may have traveled to meet their friends and relatives. Remember, they traveled on foot. How do you come to school? How long would it take you to walk from your home to school? How long would it take you if you took a bus or rode a bicycle? How do we know about these people? Archaeologists have found some of the things hunter-gatherers made and used. It is likely that people made and used tools of stone, wood, and bone, of which stone tools have survived best. Some uses of stone tools are given below. Make a list of what these tools were used for and try and decide which of these tasks could be performed using a natural pebble. Give reasons for your answer. Some of these stone tools were used to cut meat and bone, scrape bark from trees and hides animal skins, chop fruit and roots. Some may have been attached to handles of bone or wood to make spears and arrows for hunting. Other tools were used to chop wood, which was used as firewood. Wood was also used to make huts and tools.
The image shows different types of stone tools. These tools represent various stages of development, with some being among the earliest examples and others crafted several thousand years later. The tools vary in shape and size. The image also includes natural pebbles for comparison, illustrating the raw material from which some tools may have originated. The progression from early tools to later tools demonstrate an evolution in tool-making techniques. The image shows illustrations of potential uses for stone tools. One illustration depicts a hand using a stone tool to dig in the ground near a plant, presumably to collect edible roots. The other illustration shows a hand using a stone tool to stitch clothes made out of animal skin.
Choosing a place to live in. Choosing a place to live in. Look at map 2 below. All the places marked with red triangles are sites from which archaeologists have found evidence of hunter-gatherers. Hunter-gatherers lived in many more places. Only some are shown on the map. Many sites were located near sources of water, such as rivers and lakes. As stone tools were important, people tried to find places where good quality stone was easily available. Places where stone was found and where people made tools are known as factory sites. How do we know where these factories were? Usually, we find blocks of stone, tools that were made and perhaps discarded because they were not perfect, and chips of waste stone left behind at these sites. Sometimes, people lived here for longer spells of time. These sites are called habitation cum factory sites. If you had to describe the place you live in, which of the terms would you choose? A. Habitation. B. Factory. C. Habitation cum factory. D. Any other Bhimbetka in present-day Madhya Pradesh. Some sites, known as habitation sites, are places where people lived. These include caves and rock shelters such as the one shown here. People chose these natural caves because they provided shelter from the rain, heat, and wind. Natural caves and rock shelters are found in the Vindhyas and the Deccan Plateau. These rock shelters are close to the Nirmada Valley. Can you think of why people chose to live here?
Map 2 Summary. This is a map illustrating some important archaeological sites. The map shows the locations of Paleolithic, Neolithic, and megalithic sites, along with early villages and modern cities. Paleolithic sites are more concentrated in the southern part of the region, while Neolithic and megalithic sites are scattered throughout. Early villages and modern cities appear to be fewer in number compared to the other site types. Image Summary. The image shows a rock shelter, which is a type of habitation site where people lived. These natural caves provided shelter from the weather. These shelters are located in areas like the Vindhyas and the Deccan Plateau, often near river valleys. People chose to live in these locations because they offered protection and access to resources.
Sites are places where the remains of things, tools, pots, buildings, etc. were found. These were made, used, and left behind by people. These may be found on the surface of the earth, buried under the earth, or sometimes even underwater. You will learn more about different sites in later chapters. Making stone tools. Stone tools were probably made using two different techniques. The first is called stone on stone. Here, the pebble from which the tool was to be made, also called the core, was held in one hand. Another stone, which was used as a hammer, was held in the other hand. The second stone was used to strike off flakes from the first, till the required shape was obtained. 2. Pressure flaking. Here the core was placed on a firm surface. The hammer stone was used on a piece of bone or stone that was placed on the core, to remove flakes that could be shaped into tools.
Figure Summary. The image illustrates one of the techniques used to make stone tools. The image shows a stone being struck against another stone to create flakes. This technique involves holding a core in one hand and using another stone as a hammer to strike off flakes until the desired shape is achieved.
Finding out about fire. Find the Kernol Caves on Map 2, page 14. Traces of ash have been found here. This suggests that people were familiar with the use of fire. Fire could have been used for many things, as a source of light, to roast meat, and to scare away animals. What do we use fire for today? A changing environment. Around 12,000 years ago, there were major changes in the climate of the world, with a shift to relatively warm conditions. In many areas, this led to the development of grasslands. This in turn led to an increase in the number of deer, antelope, goat, sheep, and cattle, that is, animals that survived on grass. Those who hunted these animals now followed them, learning about their food habits and their breeding seasons. It is likely that this helped people to start thinking about herding and rearing these animals themselves. Fishing also became important. This was also a time when several grain-bearing grasses, including wheat, barley, and rice, grew naturally in different parts of the subcontinent. Men, women, and children probably collected these grains as food and learnt where they grew and when they ripened. This may have led them to think about growing plants on their own. Names and dates. Archaeologists have given lengthy names for the time that we are studying. They call the earliest period the Paleolithic. This comes from two Greek words, paleo, meaning old, and lithos, meaning stone. The name points to the importance of finds of stone tools. The Paleolithic period extends from 2 million years ago to about 12,000 years ago. This long stretch of time is divided into the lower, middle, and upper Paleolithic. This long span of time covers 99% of human history. The period when we find environmental changes, beginning about 12,000 years ago till about 10,000 years ago, is called the Mesolithic, Middle Stone. Stone tools found during this period are generally tiny and are called microliths. Microliths were probably stuck onto handles of bone or wood to make tools such as saws and sickles. At the same time, older varieties of tools continued to be in use. Look at the illustration on page 13. Do you notice any difference in the tools belonging to these periods? The next stage, from about 10,000 years ago, is known as the Neolithic. You will be learning about the Neolithic in Chapter 3. What do you think the term Neolithic means? We have also mentioned the names of some places. You will find the names of many more places in later chapters. Very often, we use present-day names of the places where people lived in the past because we do not know what they called them. Rock paintings and what they tell us. Many of the caves in which these early people lived have paintings on the walls. Some of the best examples are from Madhya Pradesh and southern Uttar Pradesh. These paintings show wild animals, drawn with great accuracy and skill. Who did what? We have seen that the earliest people hunted, gathered plant produce, made stone tools, and painted on cave walls. Is there any way of finding out whether women hunted or men made stone tools, whether women painted or men gathered fruits and nuts? At present, we do not really know. However, there are at least two possibilities. It is likely that both men and women may have done many of these things together. It is also possible that some tasks were done only by women and others only by men. And again, there could have been different practices in different parts of the subcontinent. Ostriches in India. Ostriches were found in India during the Paleolithic period. Large quantities of ostrich eggshells were found at Patni in Maharashtra. Designs were engraved on some pieces, while beads were also made out of them. What do you think the beads could have been used for? Where do we find ostriches today? A closer look, Hunski. Find Hunski on Map 2, page 14. A number of early Paleolithic sites were found here. At some sites, a large number of tools used for all sorts of activities were found. These were probably habitation cum factory sites. In some of the other, smaller sites, there is evidence to suggest that tools were made. Some of the sites were close to springs. Most tools were made from limestone, which was locally available. Can you think of a term for the second type of sites? Elsewhere. Find France in your atlas. The painting below is from a cave in France. This site was discovered by 4 school children more than 100 years ago. Paintings like this were made between 20,000 and 10,000 years ago. Many of these were of animals, such as wild horses, aurochs, an older, wild form of cattle, bison, woolly rhinoceros, reindeer, and bear, painted in bright colors. These colors were made from minerals like ochre or iron ore and charcoal. It is possible that these paintings were done on ceremonial occasions. Or perhaps they were made for special rituals, performed by hunters before they went in search of prey. Can you think of any other reasons?
Image summary. The image shows cave paintings from a site in France. The paintings, created between 20,000 and 10,000 years ago, predominantly depict animals. The colors used were derived from natural materials such as minerals and charcoal. It is thought that these paintings may have served ceremonial or ritualistic purposes, potentially related to hunting practices.
Imagine. You live in a rock shelter like the one shown on page 15 about 12,000 years ago. Your uncle is painting one of the inner walls of the cave and you want to help him. Will you mix the colors, draw the lines, fill in the colors? What are the stories he might tell you? Let's recall. 1. Complete the sentences. A. Hunter-gatherers chose to live in caves and rock shelters because B. Grasslands developed around years ago. C. Early people painted on the of caves. D. In Hunski, tools were made of. 2. Look at the present-day political map of the subcontinent on page 136. Find out the states where Bhimbetka, Hunski, and Kurnool are located. Would Tushar's train have passed near any of these sites? Let's discuss. 3. Why did the hunter-gatherers travel from place to place? In what ways are these similar to different from the reasons for which we travel today? For what tools would you use today for cutting fruit? What would they be made of? 5. List 3 ways in which hunter-gatherers used fire. See page 16. Would you use fire for any of these purposes today? Let's do. 6. Make 2 columns in your notebook. In the left-hand column, list the foods hunter-gatherers ate. See page 11. In the right-hand column, list some of the foods you eat. Do you notice any similarities, differences? 7. If you had a natural pebble like the ones shown on page 13, what would you use it for? 8. List 2 tasks that are performed by both men and women at present. List another 2 that are performed only by women and 2 that are performed only by men. Compare your list with that of any 2 of your classmates. Do you notice any similarities, differences in your lists? Some important dates. The Mesolithic period, 12,000 to 10,000 years ago. The beginning of the Neolithic, 10,000 years ago. Chapter 3, From Gathering to Growing Food.
Image summary. This image shows a girl and some text. The text primarily discusses the transition from food gathering to food growing. It highlights the food preferences of a girl named Ninuo, whose diet includes items grown in her grandmother's garden. The text explains that food sources like fruits, vegetables, grains, milk, and meat come from plants and animals. It also mentions that different plants thrive in diverse conditions, using rice and wheat as examples. Additionally, it points out that certain animals, such as sheep and goats, are more adaptable to dry, hilly environments compared to cattle. The text touches upon the beginnings of farming and herding, noting that climate changes led to the cultivation of plants and domestication of animals for food. It suggests that early humans observed edible plants, seeds, and growth patterns, leading them to protect plants and seeds, which eventually resulted in farming practices.
Ninuo's lunch. Ninuo's lunch. Ninuo was eating her favorite food: boiled rice, squash, pumpkins, beans, and meat. Her grandmother had grown the squash, pumpkin, and beans in the little garden plot at the back of her house. She remembered the food had been so different when she had been to Madhya Pradesh as part of a school trip. It was hot and spicy. Why was that so? Varieties of foods. Varieties of foods today. Most of our food, such as fruit, vegetables, grain, milk, and meat, comes from plants that are grown and animals that are reared. Different plants grow in different conditions. Rice, for example, requires more water than wheat and barley. This explains why farmers grow some crops in some areas and not in other areas. Different animals, too, prefer different environments. For instance, sheep and goat can survive more easily than cattle in dry, hilly environments. But, as you saw in Chapter 2, women and men did not always produce their own food. The beginnings of farming and herding. The beginnings of farming and herding. We have seen in Chapter 2 that the climate of the world was changing, and so were plants and animals that people used as food. Men, women, and children probably observed several things: the places where edible plants were found, how seeds broke off stalks, fell on the ground, and new plants sprouted from them. Perhaps they began looking after plants, protecting them from birds and animals so that they could grow and the seeds could ripen. In this way, people became farmers. Women, men, and children could also attract and then tame animals by leaving food for them near their shelters. The first animal to be tamed was the wild ancestor of the dog. Later, people encouraged animals that were relatively gentle to come near the camps where they lived. These animals, such as sheep, goat, cattle, and also the pig, lived in herds, and most of them ate grass. Often, people protected these animals from attacks by other wild animals. This is how they became herders. Can you think of any reasons why the dog was perhaps the first animal to be tamed? Domestication is the name given to the process in which people grow plants and look after animals. Very often, plants and animals that are tended by people become different from wild plants and animals. This is because people select plants and animals for domestication. For example, they select those plants and animals that are not prone to disease. They also select plants that yield large-size grain and have strong stalks, capable of bearing the weight of the ripe grain. Seeds from selected plants are preserved and sown to ensure that new plants and seeds will have the same qualities. Amongst animals, those that are relatively gentle are selected for breeding. As a result, gradually, domesticated animals and plants become different from wild animals and plants. For example, the teeth and horns of wild animals are usually much larger than those of domesticated animals. Look at these two sets of teeth. Which do you think belongs to a wild pig and which to a domesticated one? Domestication was a gradual process that took place in many parts of the world. It began about 12,000 years ago. Virtually all the plant and animal produce that we use as food today is a result of domestication. Some of the earliest plants to be domesticated were wheat and barley. The earliest domesticated animals include sheep and goat.
Image summary. The image shows two sets of teeth, presumably from pigs. The text near the image asks which set of teeth belongs to a wild pig and which belongs to a domesticated pig. Domesticated animals often have smaller teeth compared to their wild counterparts, which is an adaptation resulting from human selection during the domestication process.
A new way of life. Ways in which grain was used. If you plant a seed, you will notice that it takes some time to grow. This may be for several days, weeks, months, and in some cases years. When people began growing plants, it meant that they had to stay in the same place for a long time looking after the plants, watering, weeding, driving away animals and birds, till the grain ripened. And then, the grain had to be used carefully. As grain had to be stored for both food and seed, people had to think of ways of storing it. In many areas, they began making large clay pots, or wove baskets, or dug pits into the ground. Do you think hunter-gatherers would have made and used pots? Give reasons for your answer.
Image summary. The image illustrates different uses of grains. Grains are used as seeds for future cultivation. Grains also serve as a source of food. Furthermore, grains are given as gifts. Grains are stored for food.
Storing animals. Animals multiply naturally. Besides, if they are looked after carefully, they provide milk, which is an important source of food, and meat, whenever required. In other words, animals that are reared can be used as a store of food. Apart from food, what are the other things that could have been obtained from animals? What are animals used for today? Finding out about the first farmers and herders. Turn to Map 2, page 14. You will notice a number of blue squares. Each marks a site from where archaeologists have found evidence of early farmers and herders. These are found all over the subcontinent. Some of the most important ones are in the northwest, in present-day Kashmir, and in East and South India. To find out whether these sites were settlements of farmers and herders, scientists study evidence of plants and animal bones. One of the most exciting finds includes remains of burnt grain. These may have been burnt accidentally or on purpose. Scientists can identify these grains, and so we know that a number of crops were grown in different parts of the subcontinent. They can also identify the bones of different animals. Look at the table below to see where evidence of grain and bones of domesticated animals have been found.
Table summary. The table presents a diverse range of grains and animal bones discovered at various archaeological sites across the subcontinent, indicating different agricultural and pastoral practices in distinct geographical regions. For instance, Meagar shows evidence of wheat, barley, sheep, goat, and cattle. Koldiwa and Mahegara in Uttar Pradesh primarily feature rice and cattle remains, with Mahegara specifically noting cattle hoof marks. Sites in Kashmir, Gufkril and Burzahim, reveal wheat and lentil, with Burzahim also including a wider array of domesticated animals like dogs, cattle, sheep, goat, and buffalo. Kairand in Bihar presents wheat, green gram, barley, buffalo, and ox. Southern sites like Halar and Payampally in Andhra Pradesh show millet, cattle, sheep, goat, and pig, with Payampally additionally featuring black gram. This demonstrates a varied pattern of early farming and herding across the subcontinent.
Towards a settled life. Archaeologists have found traces of huts or houses at some sites. For instance, in Burzahim in present-day Kashmir, people built pit houses, which were dug into the ground, with steps leading into them. These may have provided shelter in cold weather. Archaeologists have also found cooking hearths both inside and outside the huts, which suggests that, depending on the weather, people could cook food either indoors or outdoors. Draw a pit house. Stone tools have been found from many sites as well. Many of these are different from the earlier Paleolithic tools, and that is why they are called Neolithic. These include tools that were polished to give a fine cutting edge, and mortars and pestles used for grinding grain and other plant produce. Mortars and pestles are used for grinding grain even today, several thousand years later. At the same time, tools of the Paleolithic types continued to be made and used, and remember, some tools were also made of bone. New stone tools. Compare these with the tools shown on page 13, chapter 2. Can you see any similarities or differences? Many kinds of earthen pots have also been found. These were sometimes decorated and were used for storing things. People began using pots for cooking food, especially grains like rice, wheat, and lentils that now became an important part of the diet. Besides, they began weaving cloth, using different kinds of materials, for example cotton, that could now be grown. Did things change everywhere and all at once? Not quite. In many areas, men and women still continued to hunt and gather food, and elsewhere people adopted farming and herding slowly, over several thousand years. Besides, in some cases people tried to combine these activities, doing different things during different seasons. What do you think could have been stored in this jar?
Image summary. The image shows examples of new stone tools. These tools represent a progression from earlier Paleolithic tools, featuring finer cutting edges achieved through polishing. These tools include implements like mortars and pestles, which were essential for grinding grains and plant products. These tools highlight the advancements in tool-making techniques during the Neolithic period, while also noting the continued use of older Paleolithic tool types and the incorporation of bone into tool construction. Image summary. The image shows an earthen pot. Earthen pots were sometimes decorated and used for storing food items. Pots were used for cooking food, especially grains like rice, wheat, and lentils.
What about other customs and practices? Archaeology does not tell us directly about these. Scholars have studied the lives of present-day farmers who practice simple agriculture. They have also studied the lives of herders. Many of these farmers and herders live in groups called tribes. Scholars find that they follow certain customs and practices that may have existed earlier as well. Tribes, usually 2 to 3 generations, live together in small settlements or villages. Most families are related to one another, and groups of such families form a tribe. Members of a tribe follow occupations such as hunting, gathering, farming, herding, and fishing. Usually, women do most of the agricultural work, including preparing the ground, sowing seeds, looking after the growing plants, and harvesting grain. Children often look after plants, driving away animals and birds that might eat them. Women also thresh, husk, and grind grain. Men usually lead large herds of animals in search of pasture. Children often look after small flocks. The cleaning of animals and milking is done by both men and women. Both women and men make pots, baskets, tools, and huts. They also take part in singing, dancing, and decorating their huts. Some men are regarded as leaders. They may be old and experienced, or young, brave warriors or priests. Old women are respected for their wisdom and experience. Tribes have rich and unique cultural traditions, including their own language, music, stories, and paintings. They also have their own gods and goddesses. What makes tribes different from many other societies you will be studying about is that land, forests, grasslands, and water are regarded as the wealth of the entire tribe, and everybody shares and uses these together. There are no sharp differences between the rich and the poor. Make a list of all the activities performed by men in tribal societies. What do women do? Are there any activities that are done by both men and women? A closer look, living and dying in Meagar. Find Meagar on Map 2, page 14. This site is located in a fertile plain near the Balan Pass, which is one of the most important routes into Iran. Meagar was probably one of the places where women and men learnt to grow barley and wheat and rear sheep and goats for the first time in this area. It is one of the earliest villages that we know about. Village. One of the distinctive features of a village is that most people who live there are engaged in food production. Archaeologists who excavated the site found evidence of many kinds of animal bones from the earliest levels. These included bones of wild animals, such as the deer and pig. In later levels, they found more bones of sheep and goat, and in still later levels, cattle bones are most common, suggesting that this was the animal that was generally kept by the people. Earlier and later levels. When archaeologists are digging at an excavation site, how do they know which level is earlier and which is later? Look at the illustration. Suppose people first start living on flat land layer 4. Over the years, the surface will gradually rise because people discard waste material and generally stay and rebuild houses in the same place. After hundreds of years, this leads to the formation of a mound. So, when this mound is dug up, what is found from the upper layers of the mound is generally from a later time than what is found from the lower layers of the mound, which are older. Other finds at Meagar include remains of square or rectangular houses. Each house had 4 or more compartments, some of which may have been used for storage. When people die, their relatives and friends generally pay respect to them. People look after them, perhaps in the belief that there is some form of life after death. Burial is one such arrangement. Several burial sites have been found at Meagar. In one instance, the dead person was buried with goats, which were probably meant to serve as food in the next world.
Image summary. The image illustrates how archaeologists determine the relative ages of different layers at an excavation site. The diagram shows a cross-section of a mound, with numbered layers. The lower layers are older than the upper layers because the surface gradually rises over time as people discard waste and rebuild in the same place, leading to the formation of a mound. Figure summary. The image shows an illustration of a house in Mayagar. The house appears to have multiple compartments or rooms. The structure seems to be made of brick or stone. The illustration provides a visual representation of the architectural style and layout of houses during that period. Image summary. The image shows a depiction of a burial site discovered in Mayagar. The illustration contains the skeletal remains of a human and multiple goats. The presence of goats in the burial suggests a belief in an afterlife where the animals would serve as sustenance for the deceased.
A closer look, B. Dayajali Hating. A closer look, B. Dayajali Hating. Find Dayajali Hating on Map 2, page 14. This is a site on the hills near the Brahmaputra Valley, close to routes leading into China and Myanmar. Here stone tools, including mortars and pestles, have been found. These indicate that people were probably growing grain and preparing food from it. Other finds include jadeite, a stone that may have been brought from China. Also common are finds of tools made of fossil wood, ancient wood that has hardened into stone, and pottery. Elsewhere, find Turkey in your atlas. One of the most famous Neolithic sites, Cattle Hayuk, was found in Turkey. Several things were brought from great distances: flint from Syria, cowries from the Red Sea, shells from the Mediterranean Sea, and used in the settlement. Remember, there were no carts. Most things would have been carried on the backs of pack animals, such as cattle, or by people. What do you think cowries and shells would have been used for? Imagine you are in charge of a small plot of land and have to decide what food crops to grow. What are the plants you would choose? Where would you get the seeds from? How would you plant them? How would you look after your plants? And when would they be ready for harvesting? Let's recall. 1. Why do people who grow crops have to stay in the same place for a long time? 2. Look at the table on page 25. If Ninua wanted to eat rice, which are the places she should have visited? 3. Why do archaeologists think that many people who lived in Mayagar were hunters to start with, and that herding became more important later? 4. State whether true or false. A. Millets have been found at Haller. B. People in Burzahem lived in rectangular houses. C. Kairend is a site in Kashmir. D. Jadeite, found in Dayajali Hating, may have been brought from China. Let's discuss. 5. List 3 ways in which the lives of farmers and herders would have been different from that of hunter-gatherers. 6. Make a list of all the animals mentioned in the table, page 25. For each one, describe what they may have been used for. Let's do. 7. List the cereals that you eat. 8. Do you grow the cereals you have listed in answer number 7? If yes, draw a chart to show the stages in growing them. If not, draw a chart to show how these cereals reach you from the farmers who grow them. Some important dates. Beginnings of domestication, about 12,000 years ago. Beginning of settlement at Mayagar, about 8,000 years ago.
Image summary. This is an image of a textbook page. The page contains questions for the reader to answer. Under the titles, let's recall, let's discuss, and let's do. A sidebar on the right lists some important dates, including the beginnings of domestication and the beginning of settlement at Mayagar. The questions prompt the reader to think about the lives of farmers and herders versus hunter-gatherers, and to list cereals they eat and how they obtain them. Image summary. This is an image of 2 children, presumably Jaspal and Harpreet, who are the